At that time, we didn't use an ultrasound machine to identify where vessels were. We just knew anatomically where they were and so forth. And so a subclavian, so the clavicle, right below the clavicle, and the clavicle is the collarbone. Right below the clavicle, there's a big artery and there's a big vein. And so you can put a needle underneath the clavicle and you can enter this vein and you can put this IV, this large IV into it. And if you screw that up just a little bit, you poke a hole in the lung and you get a collapsed lung, and or you can poke a hole through the artery and cause all this bleeding, all this. Anyway, and so in that scenario, imagine I've done hundreds of these, and here's this new trainee who is let's say a first year resident. They're right out of their medical school. They've never done this before. And I'm saying, okay, we're going to do this, what in theory could be life-threatening procedure because people have died from it. We're going to do this life-threatening procedure and you're going to be the person doing it. And I'm just going to stand here and tell you kind of how to do it. And they freeze. And in that moment, it's not a crisis for me. I've done this hundreds of times.
Mhm.
But in that moment, it's a crisis for them. And in the same way, we have to be able to stop and say, okay, here's what I need you to do. Right. So in a sense, crisis almost isn't even necessarily everything's on fire or whatever, but it's where is that person? So I think my point is being attuned to the people that we're trying to lead and where they are and understanding that sometimes they may be in a crisis and unless we're paying attention, we won't even know it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain look that often you can identify, and it's kind of this glassy-eyed look, and it is that freeze. You can tell this person is, in essence, afraid to do anything in this moment. And yes, there is, especially if you are a more experienced or more senior leader, someone who's done this before. There's some validation that, yeah, it's normal. This is your first time doing it. It's normal if you are feeling a little nervous about it. But then again, the chaos that's in their head trying to pull them out of that towards action. What are the steps? And anytime you look at something as some huge, big thing, or, sometimes it's more than just a perception. Sometimes maybe this is a patient having the worst day of their life. Something horrible's happened to them. It's not happening to you. You're okay, but you're trying to help them. When you look at that whole big picture, everything is always scarier, but when you're able to break it down into those clear,
Yeah.
simple
Right.
steps, uh, it seems doable. Maybe you just gave somebody a cancer diagnosis and, they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, am I gonna be dead in a month? What's gonna happen to my kids?" And those things are very important and it's normal to think them, but like, let's back up to the next step. What is next? How can we get you an appointment you need? What effect is this having on you now? And it's breaking, that huge steep mountain ahead into small steps for somebody who may be having, as you said, that kind of individual crisis moment, and you're the leader trying to help guide them through it.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick science break here because I think the research really perfectly reinforces what we're discussing. So, first, communication clarity, which we've been hammering on, we've been clear about, if you will, is one of the strongest predictors of successful crisis outcomes. So, there was a study in 2020 in JAMA, that's the Journal of American Medical Association Network Open, examining medical emergency teams that found teams with clear directive communication reduced time to intervention by over 30%, which dramatically improved clinical outcomes. So that's obviously that's a strong piece of
Mhm.
information. Second, social psychology tells us that in acute stress situations, and this is what we've just been hitting on, that acute stress is different for different people. People experience cognitive narrowing, which you were saying earlier, vision narrows. Research by Leach and Griffiths shows that under stress, individuals seek authoritative cues. So they actually look for someone who is decisive, calm, and directive. And that's why what we would refer to as command presence and directive communication matters in crisis. Third, studies on trust, particularly work by Mayer, Davis, and Sherman, show that trust in leadership reduces reaction time because followers are less likely to question motives or competence during those urgent situations. So, together, the science really reinforces clarity matters, command presence and directiveness matter, pre established trust matters more than anything.
Yeah, I love your approach and pulling the science. What does it say? Because sometimes, there's surprises, but sometimes it reinforces what an experienced leader knows or, has been through or has seen. And those pieces, you are trying to get people out of their hesitant state. You're trying to get them to, yes, be focused, but also take in a lot of information and a lot of things happening. And through that process, trust you. And by necessity, and you had hit on this earlier, you're going to have to be using fewer words. You're going to have to be more directive. So that foundation of trust is key to have people follow your lead.
Well, Sophie, let's make this practical for our listeners. For leaders who want to be more effective communicators during crisis, what are some concrete steps that you would recommend for them?
Well, the first I'd say is a mini pause, taking 2 or 3 seconds. I said that heart rate starts going the minute you hear something has happened, and even a simple deep breath to help you bring all those physical signals happening down so that you can hear your thinking a little bit more. And then using your calm to lead other people's calm, to bring people into that space of orderliness, calmness. And it's like contagious, emotions are. And so if you as the leader step forward like that, people pick up on it. And I would also say narrating as much as you can, right? And this is a hard one because we said we're not trying to use too many words, but also you need to make your thinking clear. You need to be transparent about what you know and what you don't know. Nothing breeds confusion and fear like the unknown and silence. People start filling in, information gaps and
Yeah,
usually making up the worst version
right.
of the situation that's possible. So you have to own the information, if that makes sense. We talked about that prep and the debrief, and I think those are key pieces not to forget. Now, you can't predict what's going to happen, and that's the nature of these things, but you can prepare and you can at least hit some of the common low bar things that are most likely to happen in a scenario. And then the debrief, you will, no matter what you think, you'll get through it. The crisis will eventually pass, and learning from it because, as you know, history repeats itself if you don't take the time to stop and learn.
Yeah. Well, those are great. The debrief that you're describing is consistent with what the after action report that a lot
Mhm.
of organizations use now that actually was derived from the military. And it's really going over what are the learning opportunities that we have in this scenario. I was struck by this idea of narrating that you were talking about. Like that is valuable, as you say, being concise, but allowing people to know what you're thinking, where you are, where you think things are heading, so that they can entrain onto that same path
Mhm.
that you're thinking about. So those are valuable. Thanks for sharing those.